Hey everyone, Annie Dickerson here with Goodegg Investments, and I just wanted to share a little tip with you today, which is that if you are raising capital for real estate syndications, one of the most effective strategies for finding new investor leads is appearing on other people's podcasts. Now, in a previous video, I went through 5 different strategies to get new investor leads, and that was the number one strategy, and we've seen it work time and again in our business, because every time we go on a podcast, the listeners who are listening to that episode get to know us more than if they were just to skim a blog post that we wrote. And so I want to talk a little bit though about being on podcasts and going on podcasts for the first time, because it can be very daunting if you've never done it before. And I know a lot of you out there who are new to syndication might be intimidated by the thought of going on a real estate investing podcast. You're probably thinking, oh my gosh, who am I to go on those podcasts? They have all these other experts with years and years and decades of experience. They've done way bigger properties than I have. Who am I to go on those podcasts and share my little story, my little experience, right? And I want to let you in on a little secret, which is that everybody has a unique story, and that's the value that you bring. No matter where you are in your real estate journey, you have something of value to share with the listeners. Even if you're just saying, hey, I'm getting started, and here's one thing that I tried that seems to have worked, that's fantastic, because a lot of those listeners are likely going to be beginners too. And so when beginners listen to somebody who's 40 years out, who's been doing this for a really long time, those experts are going to be talking about strategies that are way too advanced for the beginner. So no matter where you are on your journey, there's going to be listeners out there who want to hear your story, who need to hear your strategies and your tips. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I know a lot of you might be intimidated by going on a real estate podcast, but newsflash, there are lots of podcasts. In fact, there are over 1 million podcasts out there. And when I first started on the podcast circuit, the very first podcast I was on had nothing to do with real estate. In fact, you want to know what it was? It was called the INFJ podcast. If you're familiar with Myers-Briggs personality assessment, INFJ is actually the rarest personality type. I think it's like less than 1% of the population. So I'm a super unique person, as you can tell. And so they, even though it's 1% of the population, right? They had an entire podcast devoted to this personality type. And basically, I listened to the podcast. I loved the podcast. I got a ton of value out of it. And I was listening to it, and I realized the host was interviewing a lot of experts, psychologists, authors, and experts in the field about personality types and things like that. And I wrote to the host and I said, you know, your podcast is fantastic, but I would love to hear from other people just like me, just normal, everyday people who are this personality type, the INFJ. I'd like to hear their everyday stories and their experiences with being an INFJ personality type. And I said, you know what? I am an INFJ. And if you're interested, I would love to come on your podcast and share more about my experience. And so that's how I got my very first podcast appearance. And even though it was still nerve-wracking, because you got to get that microphone and the headphones and the technology, and you got to figure all that out. But the good part was, I had been an INFJ all my life. And so I was a seeming expert on it, right? And so that's the tip I want you to take away is if you feel intimidated by the thought of going on a real estate podcast, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I haven't done a deal yet. I'm new to syndications. Maybe you've only invested passively, or maybe you've only done single family homes and you're like, oh, I don't have anything to share. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Okay? You are an expert in something, whether it's a hobby that you have or your full-time job. You can share your wisdom and your experiences on those types of podcasts. Let's say you're an engineer. You can find an engineering podcast and go on there. And guess what? The listeners of the podcast are probably going to be your target audience because they love what you love. And so you can go on there and you can share all your tips about, in this example, engineering, right? Your experience working in the field and all of that. And then the host will most likely ask you, what are you doing these days? Or, what do you like to do for fun? And, what's your vision for the future? Something along those lines, right? And then you can bring in what you're doing in real estate. So in that way, you are the expert, because most of the people who are listening probably don't invest in real estate, or if they do, they don't have the level of experience and expertise that you do. So you become the expert. I guess it's the proverbial big fish in the small pond. I guess, sort of related. But you become the expert there, versus when you come on a real estate podcast, you might feel intimidated because everybody knows real estate, right? So you work your way up to that. So in fact, we've gotten lots of great investor leads through podcasts that are not related at all to real estate. And so that can be a really great way to start. So number one is, remember that your story, no matter where you are on your investing journey, is of value. You have valuable things to share with others. And second is, if you're not comfortable being on a real estate podcast, then don't start there. Start with something where you feel like an expert, you have something to share, and then get comfortable with being on podcasts and what that experience is like. And then as you build your real estate experience and your comfort level with being on podcasts, then you can graduate, so to speak, and move up to those real estate podcasts and those more advanced podcasts. Okay, so I hope that has helped. I would love to hear your experience with being on podcasts, whether you are looking to be a guest on a podcast, you've never been on a podcast before, or maybe you have been on a podcast before. And I would love to hear your experience, the traction that you've gained, and what has transpired from you being on those podcasts. Comment below. I would love to hear more. And finally, if you liked this video, please hit that like button below, subscribe to our channel so we can continue to bring you great content to help you build a fantastic and effective real estate brand. I'm Annie Dickerson. Thank you so much for watching.